My why starts when my wife and I were moving from California to Nashville, Tennessee. Is Nashville in the house? Dr. Joseph is here. So we were moving to Nashville for graduate school, and Heather was entering law school. I was entering business school. I do want to point out the hairline. It's a different relationship that Jason Culbertson and Michael Moody shared a little earlier. I've actually got more hair now than I did then. But we landed in Nashville, and I had 2 weeks before I was scheduled to start classes. And so my wife said, "Why don't you go volunteer?" I think she just wanted to get me out of the house. So I found a center there called the Bowie Reading and Learning Center. And the Bowie Center was a center for students with dyslexia. And so I started volunteering. And when I got there, I realized pretty quickly that I had found my passion. I met a guy named Noah. Noah was a student who had come to Bowie Center begrudgingly. And Noah was a surly redhead senior in high school. And his parents, who were both high-powered attorneys in Nashville, they asked him to come to the Bowie Center because he was failing. He was failing all of his classes, and they just didn't know what to do. So I got to know Noah, and we talked a lot, and we struck up a friendship pretty quickly. And it was through that friendship that Noah shared with me that many of his teachers, if not all of them, had either overtly or in other ways told him that he was a failure. Some had said that he just was incapable of learning. Others socially promoted him because he was disruptive in their classrooms, and they didn't want him in their class anymore, so they just promoted him to the next grade. And he made it all the way to his senior year in high school without learning to read. So it was at that point that I made a commitment to myself and to Noah that we were going to figure this out together. I didn't know how to teach reading. I was a decent reader myself, but I had never studied the science behind reading. So I dug into every book that I could find on how to unlock the code. And Noah and I, together, we unlocked the code. He unlocked the code, and I learned how to teach others how to do that. And it was in that moment that the passion within me was continuing to grow, because I saw Noah change, not just in his ability to read. And by the way, 12 short weeks, and he was picking up every book he could find. Something had unlocked within him. And so his appearance changed. He became more confident. He was coming dressed differently, even to our sessions. And it was about the 14th week that I was working with Noah that we were out in the parking lot, and he received a call from his mom. And he put the call on speakerphone, and I could tell that his mom was crying. And his mom said to him, "I'm really proud of you, Noah. I finally have my son back." Because she was equally frustrated with his ability to not read, or his inability to read, and she just didn't know how to help him. And she finally realized that he was not only changing himself, but he was also changing in his interactions with his mother and with his father. And so it was that really that grounds my why. And that motivated me to go to the school, the university where I was enrolled in business school, and to go to the education department and to meet with the folks, the professors there. And I convinced them to give me a ticket into the Masters of Ed program instead of business school, because I wanted my teaching certification. And I wanted to continue that work. So that's my why. That's where this work really started. It was during that program that I became a Gower Gator. Gower Elementary School was my first official teaching job, teaching first graders how to unlock the code. When I moved back to California, I transferred to a school where I taught 11th graders how to continue their work around reading, particularly students who were 2 or more grade levels below in their reading proficiency. And so that's my why. That motivates me to continue to do the work that I do today, not only around sort of the technical work around reading and helping students, but quite frankly, the ability to change an individual's life, period. So With that, I want to bring up someone who is no stranger to this work around equity and excellence. And by the way, equity in my mind is all the things we've been talking about at this conference. It's also just the simple treatment of others, right? The ability to say to Noah, for example, that you deserve what every single other kid is getting. And so that's where the sort of spark of equity came for me. It's certainly evolved since then. And I didn't know it was equity at the time. I didn't label it or call it that. But that's where this conversation started to build within me around equity. So I thank Noah for that. I want to now introduce Dr. Irvin Scott. And he has been someone that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. Dr. Scott is currently at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He's a professor there. Before coming to Harvard, Dr. Scott served for 5 years as the deputy director for the K-12 education at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There he led the investment of $300 million in initiatives focused on transforming how teachers are recruited, developed, and rewarded. So Dr. Scott is very familiar with the work that you all are doing right now in your schools to improve teacher and leader quality. Prior to his foundation work, Dr. Scott spent over 20 years working in the trenches. He was a teacher, a principal, an assistant superintendent, a chief academic officer, and he began his professional education experience in the classroom as an English teacher and choral director for 15 years. He also served as a principal at McCaskey East High School in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he reformed the 3,200 high school into 8 small learning communities. Dr. Scott holds a bachelor's degree from Millersville University, a master's degree in education from Temple University, and a master's and doctoral degree from Harvard University. I had the pleasure, as I mentioned, of working with Dr. Scott when we both served on the transition team for Dr. Sharon Contreras, who we heard from earlier, when she became superintendent of Guilford County Schools. And you know when you first meet a person, you can just tell they're a good individual, they're a good-hearted person. I knew that when I first met Irvin. I could tell that. And as we worked together, I quickly learned that my initial assessment was dead on. So there are 3 words that come to mind when I think of Irvin: humble, inspiring, and faith. And each time I have an opportunity to interact or speak with Dr. Scott, I'm left with a combined feeling of calm and hope. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Scott. Please join me in welcoming him.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can I get a little more volume? Let's try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so when I was a high school English teacher, first of all, thank you so much, Jason. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. It was heartfelt, and I really appreciate that. When I was a high school English teacher, I used to do something. I'm going to do it real quick. And when I was a choir director, I did both of these things at the same time. I used to do what we call shout-outs. When someone was doing something phenomenal, or someone brought their homework in, or they showed up on time, or they hit that note beautifully, I would say, "Shout out!" Just like that. And the students knew to respond with the same sort of response. So I want to do it real quick, but I want to do it for Jason and his team, Michael and others who put this together in support of you. We're going to give them a real quick shout out. And when I say the way I did it, I said shout out and I was really loud. I can't hear like shout out afterwards. All right, that would not be appropriate. Let's try it. Shout out! Shout out! That was beautiful. Let's try it one more time. I especially heard this crew right here in the middle. Let's try it one more time. Shout out! Shout out! Beautiful. Thank you so much for the team for doing this work. Thank you. Shout out to you also for being here, getting away and working together to figure out how to do this work in really powerful ways is what this is all about. And I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to jump right into things. So I'm going to call this Race, Equity, and Impact. Everybody say race, equity, and impact. I should tell you that I have African American church in me. I heard somebody say amen now. I'm not going to take an offering, but It's in me. And so that's one of the reasons why I ask people to repeat after me, because we do that all the time in our church. As a matter of fact, we say, turn to your neighbor. Everybody do that again. Turn to your neighbor and give him a high five. Everybody do that. Do that real quick. Just do that real quick. Yeah. Connection is critical. So race, equity, and impact. What's the story we're trying to tell, or what's the story we're trying to write? I was so moved when I heard that you've been spending time in each of the sessions talking about your why. I think that's tremendously important, and in some ways, that's what I want to talk about just for a few minutes. I'll talk about my why, but I'll talk also about some critical elements that I think should be a part of the why we do this work on a day-to-day basis, which I think is critical. Incidentally, I just have to say, I've been blessed to go so many different places where people wanted to continue the conversation with me because I said something that was provocative or I said something that they appreciated. I'd love to do that, and I'd love to do it through Twitter. So if you have, raise your hand if you have a Twitter account. Raise your hand. Okay, quite a few people. I think Twitter is a powerful tool for educators, for connecting, for sharing ideas. Follow me at iScott4, and let's continue this conversation, especially if I say something that you want to take issue with. I would love to continue the conversation. The first thing I want you to do is look at some data. I'm going to give you 30 seconds, like a good teacher. I'll give you 30 seconds to look at 2 slides, 30 seconds each. I want you to try to understand them. I want you to say what you can understand about them, and then I'm going to have you turn for 60 seconds with your neighbor and tell them what you see. Everybody got the assignment? 30 seconds. You have to be able to look at this slide. All right, here's the first one, 30 seconds. Then I'm going to show another one. This is reading. EDS means economically deficient students. What do you see? Coming to the end of this 30 seconds, here is the next slide. Math. Non-economically deficient students, economically deficient students. Okay, everyone got? Okay, turn to your neighbor. You have 60 seconds. What did you see? Real quick, 60 seconds. Black. White. It's reading. Right. Ten seconds. So there are many things that you can see in this data, but one of the things that strikes me, and hopefully you picked up on this, is that economically deficient white students are outperforming non-economically deficient Black and Hispanic students. Does race matter in schools? You better believe it does. And I don't think you can have a story about equity in this country unless you're willing to talk about data as it relates to race. Period, new paragraph. Takes courage, but must be done. Not easy to do, but must be done. When we saw this data, and actually I saw these data with Jason and his team when we were working with my colleague who's in this room right now, Sharon Contreras, in her school district. And we saw it, we were all struck by it. We showed Sharon, she was struck by it. And I was like, Sharon, should we share this? Sharon's like, expose it. Share it. Because we can't do anything about it if we're not willing to call it out. Everybody say data. And its implications for race are important to talk about. That's just one example. But I would imagine you could look at many different examples in your systems where this gets played out, and a couple I'm going to talk about before we're done. But that slide, I've shared that slide so many different places. I share it with my students. And I say this is at the heart of a conversation about race, about equity in our schools. Makes me think of another story. So data is the first thing. Has to be a part of the story we talk about when it comes to equity. When I was in ninth grade, this is part of my story. When I was in ninth grade, some of you have heard this, my ninth grade English teacher in Chambersburg Junior High School, Central Junior High School, came to our class and she said, class, we're going to be studying poetry, and we're going to do a unit on the poet, Robert Frost. How many people know Robert Frost? Raise your hand. Robert Frost. We're going to do a unit on the poet, Robert Frost, and we're going to study and analyze and write about, recite The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. And I remember in ninth grade being sort of bold. I was a preacher's kid, and so typically preacher's kids can't act up at home, so we act up in school. But I remember pushing back on that assignment and saying that I did not want to do it. And I remember her not only saying that I was going to do that, but giving me the challenge to write my own poem. She said, not only are you going to do The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, which is the poem she said we're going to recite and write about. I didn't want to recite it. She said, but you're going to write your own poem. And so I remember that assignment very personally. And the day came where I had to recite that poem, The Road Not Taken, and recite the actual poem that I wrote. And so I stood up and I said, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubt if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And she was like, yeah, he did it. But I wasn't done because she said you have to do a poem of your own. So you don't want to do that one. You have to do that one and one of your own. And she opened the door for me to do something about anything that I was interested in. And so 15 seconds, turn to your neighbor and answer this question. What do you think he wrote about? Answer it real quick. What do you think he wrote about? Just 15 seconds. Just take a guess. Just conjecture. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. This is what I wrote. And it's a part of the story that I tell about why I do this work. I wrote, behind two backs I stand, because I wrote about football. Somebody just gave someone else a high five. One person got it. Behind two backs I stand. I had a vision of being, this isn't part of the poem, I had a vision of being the next Tony Dorsett running back for the Dallas Cowboys, if anyone knows anything about football. Oh my goodness, I didn't expect that. I did not expect that. But I had this image, and one of the reasons why I had this image is because as a young African American male, those are the people that I saw doing something that was positive. I think that's a problem. But I wrote, behind two backs I stand. He was a running back. Waiting for the first back's hand. That's the quarterback. Which holds the thing that makes me spring to reach the touchdown's brand. Sometimes I'm hit, which brings great pain, but it's even worse when my run's in vain. Because some lineman jumps off sides and the ref yells out that it cost you 5. But through all this, I must keep running so the defense will think he's quite stunning. They'll keel on me from that play on, but I'm determined to keep on going. 9th grade, because of a teacher who said, not only are you going to do this, but you're going to do this. And she opened up the door to possibilities. And one of the things that I also think is tremendously important about telling a story about equity is self. You. Where are you in this discussion around improving outcomes? What are the implications? Where did you not experience equity? Where did you have a teacher who blew open the doors and transformed the way you thought about yourself or the way you thought about what you could be? At the time, only thing I could imagine myself being was a running back. Never imagining myself to one day be an English teacher or a high school principal or a district leader or work at Harvard. Irvin Scott at Harvard. You'd ask me that, I'd been like, yeah, right. But teachers see possibilities in us, in children, that we don't often see in ourselves. And that's what she saw in me. And so I think a story of equity requires you to tell your own story. That's one of the reasons why I was so excited about hearing what you were doing today and starting off sessions talking about your why. Don't stop here. Your why is not just important with people you just meet. Your why is tremendously important with people who you work with and lead every single day. Everybody say self. Incidentally, Miss Scritchfield was the teacher. The wonderful thing about Miss Scritchfield is that she was a warm demander. How many people have heard that term before, warm demander? Gloria Ladson-Billings and others talk about warm demanders. And here are some characteristics about them that I think are really, really powerful. One is they believe in the impossible. They build trust. One of the reasons why she was able to get that out of me is because she knew me, right? And teachers who know us, teachers who know kids have a way of bringing things out of them that the kid didn't know was even in there. Teaching self-discipline. I didn't all of a sudden just get up there and recite that poem. Obviously, there were structures, there was scaffolding in place so that when I stood up nearly 35 years to recite that poem, I was successful. And 35 years later, I'm still reciting it. And embrace failure. Warm demanders. Another story that I want to share, which sort of leads to this third point around what's critical for our stories to reflect when it comes to race, equity, and impact, is what I call my elevator story. My son, as Jason said, I worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for 5 years. One summer, my wife, Keisha, she called me and she was like, "Sweetie," that's what she calls me, Sweetie. She's like, "I hear you, Sharon." Sharon laughing. I was like, yeah. She's like, you have, Irvin, you have taken Leon and Nicholas, 2 of my sons, to Seattle, but you've never taken Irvin. Irvin is my oldest, so Irvin, Leon, and Nicholas. Because Irvin was in college and he couldn't go the time that we went. She said, "You should take Irvin to Seattle this summer. Y'all can just chill together." It's like, all right, sounds good, sweetie. Let me call. So I called Irvin. I was like, Irvin, your mother said that you should come to Seattle with me. And he was like, all right, Dad, I'll come with you. So we go to Seattle, and we're having a good time. And we come into our hotel one evening, true story. We come into our hotel one evening, Sheraton right there on 4th Avenue, 4th or 7th. And we go to our elevator, to go up to our room, and the door opens, and there are two men standing on the elevator. One is getting ready to leave, and the other is getting ready to go back to his room. All of this happens in a minute. We see what happened. And so when the elevator doors open, they see Irvin and I standing there. And the one that gets ready to step out looks up as he's preparing to step out. He sees us, and he steps back in. And he said, I'll go up with you. And so we all get on. All four of us are on the elevator. And our floor comes, and we get off the elevator. And we go into our room, and Irvin is livid. He's quiet, but he's like, unbelievable. I can't believe it, not right in front of us. He's like, Dad, did you see that? I was like, Irvin, chill. He's like, I can't believe, that's ridiculous. He is going off. He's not swearing because he knows I don't like swearing, but he's going off. And then it occurred to me that one of the guys was going to come back down the elevator. And if I go now to the elevator, I might catch him as he comes back down. Some of y'all are like, this brother crazy. That's what I did. True story, y'all. I went to the elevator. Got on the elevator, and I kid you not, when I got to the first floor, who was coming out of the elevator too? Because there was like three elevators, nice hotel. He was coming out of the elevator, and I went up to him. I said, we saw what you just did. He interrupted me. He's like, wait, let me explain. I said, look, I got a young son upstairs right now throwing a fit because of what just happened in a blink of an eye. He paused and he said, can I have your cell phone number? I was like, wait a minute. He said, I want to take you and your son out, and I want to talk to your son. I gave him my cell phone number. We went out the next night, and we talked about that incident. Turn to your neighbor, because I gave this story before, and I had gotten to this story at this point in time when someone raised their hand and they said, I don't understand what happened. What is the point? Turn to your neighbor and make sure everyone at your table understands the point, because the implications for school and schooling are real. 30 seconds, that's all you have, real quick, 30 seconds. "15 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Bias and implicit bias happens in a split second. The people who perpetrate it may not even know that they're perpetrating it. The people who feel it deeply and know that it's happened. And I would argue that it often happens in the systems and structures that we have embedded in our schools. And so what we have to understand is that the work that we're doing has implications for life. That's the next really, really important point, I think. And that is that these biases, these inequities, they go beyond schools. They implicate life. And so at the very least, we've got to figure out how to make sure they're not happening within the schools that we lead. I've had rich discussions on that story for that reason. Oh, incidentally, I just want to say, at Harvard, there is work on implicit bias, which I would encourage you, if you get a chance, to look at. It's called the Project Implicit, led by a faculty member. And what they've actually done is created a platform that enables you to take time and check your own bias. We all have them. We all have them. It's not just about race, but they implicate what we do on a day-to-day basis. And as leaders in schools, as educators, they have the potential to impact decisions that we make about kids. Tragic, potentially. I'm getting ready to end. Standards, curricula, instruction, task, assessment, grading. I think this is a place where bias can often be found. And so being really deliberate about whether we're expecting all kids to do the same thing in terms of standards, making sure that we have rich curricula that actually reflects the differences in our schools, making sure that we have instructional practices that support all kids, ELL, no matter what their differences are, making sure that we have the task. Everybody say task. There are the standards have changed in our country dramatically recently. But one of the things that I'm realizing is you can have high standards, but put medium, not very rigorous work in front of kids on a day-to-day basis. Task is tremendously important. And then assessment and grading, particular grading. My colleague, Thomas Guskey, recently came out with a book on grading. A really, really important book, I think, on grading. And I think we should spend more time thinking about grading as it relates to all of this. And then finally, human capital systems. I won't talk deeply about this, but ultimately, it's about the people we put in front of kids on a day-to-day basis. And the human capital systems that we build in schools are tremendously important in breaking down equity. Action. We can talk about, one of the things that I've actually been encouraged by is the amount of conversation that's been happening in our country about race, equity, diversity, and inclusion. DEI or READY, whatever you want to call it. People are talking about it. But if you don't actually get to this point, if your story doesn't include action, it doesn't include what you're actually doing about it and what data you're actually trying to move, then you're just having a conversation. And it's time out for just conversations. We actually got to move data. We got to move for kids. Let me end this way with one of my favorite poets, Langston Hughes, Harlem Renaissance poet. He said this: "Bring me your dreams, you dreamers. Bring me your heart melodies that I may wrap them up in a blue cloud cloth away from the too rough fingers of the world." And that is what poetry might do. Wrap up your dreams, protect, preserve, and hold them until maybe they come true. Columbus dreamed of finding a new world. He found it. Edison dreamed of light. More light, and he made light. All the progress that human beings have made in this old earth of ours grew out of dreams. That is why it is wise, I should think, to hold fast to dreams. For when dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field, frozen with snow. The fact of the matter is, children come to us daily. Educators come to us daily with these. And it becomes our responsibility to ensure that they achieve them. Thank you so much for this invitation. I really appreciate it.